after the few terrible years that were wasted under the previous terrible president, it was then left to Grant to try to get the post-Civil War riotous, raging South under control. And part of the way Grant tried to do that was a new set of laws called the Enforcement Acts. I mean, by that point, we had the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves, right? We had the Civil War. We had the 14th and 15th Amendments that were supposed to, free the slaves, give everybody the right to vote, make men, at least, all equal in the South. Despite those rights existing on paper, though, they absolutely didn't exist in real life. And in a lot of places in the country, particularly in the former Confederate States, it was a reign of terror. And I don't mean that hyperbolically. I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean, literally thousands of Americans were killed in political and racist violence after the end of the Civil War in the lead up to that 1868 election. And in the end, it wasn't close. Grant won it. In 1870 and 1871, he signed these Enforcement Acts. Those Enforcement Acts were designed to make the promise of freedom and equality in the South, in particular, into a reality. And one of the Enforcement Acts had the memorable name of the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. The basic idea of the Ku Klux Klan Act was that if the Southern states wouldn't corral the KKK, they wouldn't corral the KKK's invisible empire of terroristic, racist violence, if the Southern states wouldn't police that, well, then the federal government would. The Klan Act, for a time, it essentially banned the Ku Klux Klan as a terrorist organization. It federalized their crimes. Parts of it were struck down under the First Amendment, ultimately, because, frankly, freedom of assembly gives you the freedom to assemble for all sorts of terrible reasons. But parts of the Ku Klux Klan Act still survive today. And the original law does date all the way back to those terrible years after the Civil War and after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and how badly things went in those years. But the Klan Act still survives, and the Klan Act, even today, specifically makes it illegal to conspire to intimidate voters. I mean, trying to keep somebody from voting, trying to scare somebody into not voting, that's illegal anyway. But what the Klan Act does is it bans any private conspiracy to intimidate voters. That conspiracy itself, cooking up a plan to intimidate voters, that itself is a crime. Once you cook up that plan, you work with others to concoct a scheme like that, and then you try to put it into action, that conspiracy is a crime. Still today, thanks to the Klan and what they did to this country in the years after the Civil War, that is a crime today. And that law, the Klan Act of 1871, was cited today as the basis for a whole new raft of lawsuits that were just filed by the Democratic Party against the Donald J. Trump for President campaign, as well as a Trump-supporting organization and the Republican parties in the states of Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. The lawsuits are about the loosely organized poll-watching efforts that have been promoted by Trump and his campaign, and in some cases by the Republican Party, volunteer to be a Trump election observer. One of the groups that's named in these lawsuits today is one that we reported last week was running that website where you could upload a name and a photo and print yourself out a fake but official-looking badge that you could wear to the polls to go do Donald Trump poll watching. The contention of these lawsuits filed in 4 states today is that that kind of organizing isn't just about, monitoring the polls for some anodyne purpose. The contention of these lawsuits today is that that poll monitoring effort is a conspiracy to intimidate voters. And a conspiracy to intimidate voters is illegal under the Klan Act. Because of its history and because it's still called the Klan Act, the law sounds almost vestigial, right? It sounds like it's based on something that really only is ancient American history. But if you want to know how wild this election is getting in these closing days, I tonight can prove to you that something called the Klan Act is not just vestigial. It's not just about ancient history. Because tonight, we just got a hold of this disgusting development. This is the newspaper of the Ku Klux Klan today. It's the Crusader, the political voice of white Christian America, the premier voice of white resistance. They've got the whole, you see the white power symbol there in the upper right-hand corner? They've got a whole media operation going on, apparently. Watch White Pride TV. Listen to KKK radio 24 hours a day. This newsletter is about 12 pages long, features articles on the threat of non-white immigration. We got a very subtle feature on black people committing terrible crimes against white people. There's an article by the founder of the America First Party, which is all about the terrorist Jews. He brags in his byline that he's the man who David Duke credits for awakening him to the threat of Jewish supremacism. It's exactly what you would think from the Ku Klux Klan newspaper, if you knew there was a Ku Klux Klan newspaper these days. But the front page, full-page story is Make America Great Again, with a big featured center photo of Donald Trump. It's one of several articles in the paper about Trump, including this inset article about how Trump's candidacy is moving the dialogue forward. I should tell you, you can see this is a copy. We got a PDF scan of this. You see the picture there? That inset picture in that article is actually a still from a Saturday Night Live skit about seemingly normal Americans talking about how much they like Donald Trump, and then slowly they reveal themselves to be like, you know, ironing their sheets because they're Klan members. Well, that was a Saturday Night Live skit a couple months ago. This is the Klan newspaper, and they're basically like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, that skit kind of nailed it. Look at the caption on that still from Saturday Night Live. Quote, Saturday Night Live produced a mock campaign ad, Voters for Trump, in which average Americans explain why they were Trump supporters. Then viewers learn that the supporters are affiliated with organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan. In truth, many do share the same concerns. So the Klan is like, congratulations, Saturday Night Live, you nailed it. According to the Klan, you got us exactly right. Gosh. The Donald Trump endorsement version, edition of the Klan newspaper, this has been turning up on front lawns in the great state of Georgia. This one we just got a scan of. We obtained this tonight after it was picked up off a front lawn in Cartersville, Georgia, which is northwest of Atlanta. We think that we're actually going to get a physical copy of the Klan paper that's being distributed in Georgia over the next day or two. Right now, this is just a scan. I'll let you know when we get the original.